What's going on, guys? It's Bromley. Today we are talking about why I can't get stronger. We're going through part two. So we're going to cover a lot of the pitfalls that people usually see if they've been training long enough, the things that are kind of easy fixes, the obvious ones that come for everybody at some point. And as common as they are, if you don't get them taken care of, you will absolutely dig yourself into a hole that you can't get out of. So we covered kind of the novice intermediate list of pitfalls. That covered things like consistency and not having a plan and not having enough recovery, and the really common ones. And those are true for everybody, but they're usually the things people get straightened out first because you don't get very far early on if you don't get those taken care of. This one is more of the intermediate to advanced list of reasons. These have more to do with specific programming decisions. They have to do with weak points. They have to do with kind of the deliberate moves that people make while they are training and finding their plan. So we're going to go over that. So real quick, we have Peak Strength live, getting it formatted for Amazon as we speak. It's live on the store, EmpireBarbellStore.com. That has a ton to do with this specific topic, a lot about specialization, a lot about specific training decisions you have to make as time goes on. It's a lot longer than base strength, a lot more fleshed out. Pretty proud of how it came out, so go ahead and check that out. Also, I'm doing blog posts on all of these videos, and I'll probably be doing blog posts about other topics as well as they come up. So go ahead and check out the main website, Empire-Barbell. That's going to have a running catalog of all of the videos. I'm working through all of them, putting in small blog posts, and if there are any separate topics you want to hear, go ahead and leave suggestions for that as well. So thank you for checking those out. Getting into why I can't get stronger, intermediate edition. So the first one I think is the hidden boogeyman that throws the most people off. It takes them the longest to figure out, if they even figure it out. I think a lot of people suffer through this, and they'll get these kind of intermittent upswings that come after so many years of stagnation, and they never really figure out why. And that adds to the kind of mystery of training, and it reinforces the point that you don't actually have a handle on how things are put together. You shouldn't have to guess as to if you're going to go through a program, if it's going to give you the result you want. If you're winging your workout and you have this sense that you're just going to one day try the right thing and you're going to get stronger, you're not doing it right. So this is not adjusting to the changing recovery curve. I've talked about this a lot in my books, and this is pretty well established at this point. Main difference between newer, intermediate, advanced lifters is how they recover ultimately. When you start out, you're not very strong. You know, your homeostasis is lower than normal for a human being because most of us are sedentary. You're not really strong enough to create that much of a systemic stress. So the amount of stress you need to experience to get stronger is lower, and it doesn't come with the big systemic recovery hit, which means you can do it more frequently. So this is why linear progressions like starting strength have you increase weight every couple of days. As you get stronger, you can redline it more and more and more. Your technique is more efficient, which allows you to move more weight. Your nervous system is recruiting more motor units at once, which allows you to move more weight. You've increased muscle mass, tendon strength, confidence. All of these things mean that each hard effort comes with a bigger systemic hit, so you don't recover quite as fast. So as you get stronger, you need to make sure that the amount of work you're doing is sustainable. So you have to structure hard efforts within a week appropriately apart, and then you might even have to structure them on a weekly, bi-weekly, or even on a 3-week wave basis to make sure that you are not burning yourself out. There are a lot of tricks to do this. If you're doing high frequency, it's going to look different. You'll have kind of easier, smaller workouts one day, more substantial, more volume or more effort workouts another day. If you're on a lower frequency split, you might have to keep it to one main lift per upper or lower body. You might not be able to overhead press and bench press heavy in the same week. You might not be able to squat and deadlift heavy in the same week, or you might even have to alternate them. I did not start getting really consistent in the last couple of years with my deadlift until I moved it into a 9-day split. And that allowed me to put a lot more effort into my deads, which I was really hesitant to do before, and still recover so I could put in those hard workouts on a regular basis. So I wasn't detraining, but I was still training frequently enough to grow, but I wasn't burning myself out. It was a very specific balance I had to find. So you have to adjust the changing recovery curve. Pay attention to how your numbers have grown, how training hits you differently, how many days you feel kind of run down or beat up, and how your performance is workout to workout. Assuming your general day-to-day isn't that different, that you're eating enough, sleeping enough, and so on, you really need to keep track of how hard the workout was and how long it took you to recover. Not only just for finding that cruising altitude of what your workout should look like, but really for being able to plan down the road. If you do a meet, you need to know what that time frame is. You need to know, oh, okay, my bench recovers in about 8 days. My deadlift takes about 13 days or something like that. And it's a lot of trial and error, but you got to play around until you find that cruising altitude. Make sure you're adjusting for the recovery curve. Next one, not planning training into phases. So this is another one, and there are a lot of ways. There's a lot of ways to organize your training progression long term. And I talk a bit in Peak Strength about the difference between what I call progressive programs and static programs. Static being there isn't really a clear thread of progression. It might be you're just doing kind of the same work at the same RPE for so many weeks before switching. So with whatever you choose, you need to have a sense of how these workouts need to change over time to keep them going. Usually we consider that in like a competitive cycle, which is kind of the most rational way to think about it, as far as doing a bunch of off-season base building, getting your base wider, doing a lot of capacity work, building muscle and so on, preparing yourself so that by the time you start training very specifically for the competition, your performance is already higher. And that's the plan. Now, there are a lot of different ways to organize your training. It doesn't have to be that clean cut or linear, but whatever you do now and for the immediate future in your training, you have to have a plan for how to switch that. The base peak dynamic I use is really just a way to explain why periodization works the way it does, and I simplify it into two phases. There's less specific and more specific, less volume, more volume, and there's different ways of prioritizing it. But as long as that specific deliberate change happens where you can allow for more recovery, train more specific, cut out the fluff, go heavier with more efforts on one phase, and then take time to dial back and flesh out your base and make sure that you're targeting weak points, using a variety of movements, doing a lot more volume. Maybe you're going to be fatigued more of the time, and that's okay because that's what the phase is about. You need to be able to plan your stuff into phases. That ebb and flow between those different types of phases doesn't matter if you compete or not. If you want to continue growing, you can't just do a forever program like 5-3-1 for the rest of your life. At some point, you're going to have to target parts of your body, parts of your game that you need to improve in order to keep growing. Step number 3, not addressing or preventing weak areas. This kind of goes back to the point I was talking about before, putting your training into phases, because there's a time and a place to do it. You don't just assume you always have a weak area and I'm going to do 2 weeks of working on this weakness, and then maybe the week after I'll do this other thing that's supposed to attack this other potential weakness. You want to dedicate time to preventing those weaknesses or targeting them if they've already developed. If you're newer, you don't have weaknesses, everything's weak, don't do this. If you are more intermediate, you're developed, you have a substantial amount of experience under your belt already, you need to be aware of what's holding you back in each lift, where you tend to fold. Is it bracing? Is it upper back? Is it the power of your hips? Is it your quads? Is it a certain movement pattern? Are you not quite efficient? Do you not have enough, let's say, muscular endurance to be able to maintain position during hard set? There are a lot of different things you could potentially do. Now, there's two ways to do this. One, just do what you're supposed to do on base type phases, hypertrophy type phases. A lot of well-rounded variation that is designed to keep you well-rounded and smooth over your entire physique. Those are going to be things that usually have more range of motion. They disadvantage you more. You have to work harder. Less weight usually goes longer with those types of movements. They're better developmental exercises. So for your deadlift, it's going to be things like RDLs, stiff leg or snatch grip deadlifts. For your squat, it's going to be things like front squats or high bar narrow stand squats if you're used to squatting wide. Again, things that are more disadvantaged to you. For benching, things like close grip benching, even things like dumbbells or machines go a long way. But getting yourself out of your comfort zone, working different angles, working different muscle groups. So that's one. And that's easy to do. You should always have periods of variation. All athletes do it. You shouldn't treat yourself any differently. The other way to do this is to target them once they've developed. And if you're paying attention to those base phases, there shouldn't be a ton of really obvious weaknesses. You should be able to just pinpoint, okay, I noticed that I'm a little sore off my chest once the weight gets a little heavier. That's where I tend to get stuck. So then there's a list of variations that you're going to include based on that weakness. And there are a lot of Peak Strength has a lot of variations that talks about what works and why. I just read through Brian Carroll's 10-20 Life. He does the same thing. So this is pretty well known. And that's where you target that by including targeted accessory work. So let's say you do your regular benching. Your next workout, if you stick midpoint, it might be pause benches where you pause halfway up, or maybe a pin press from a dead stop. There are a lot of different exercises that target it, and you need to be able to incorporate those in. So I prefer broader developmental stuff in the base phase, more focused, heavier, or targeted stuff that's fixing existing weak points when you're in a more strength specific, competitively specific peak phase. And that kind of can be superimposed onto any type of periodization you might come across. Number 4, not emphasizing substantial off-season growth. It's similarly tied into putting your training into phases. The off season is where it's at, guys. I think of strength specific movements. It's very fun. It's very productive when you do it right. But if that's all you like to do, you're gonna hit stagnation just undoubtedly, and you're gonna just slam into it like a brick wall. And the thing is, people never really regulate themselves well enough to correct that. You know, when you love doing singles, doubles, and triples, and you just keep doing that day in, day out, and you start to burn out, you start to regress, and you stubbornly just try to change other things so you can keep that alive, you have to dial back. You have to go into an off season. You have to take time to widen out your base, or that ceiling is never going to raise any higher. That's just the way it is. So you should love the base building. You should love the off season growth. The strength specific stuff is the sprinkles on top of the sundae. The base building, that's the damn ice cream, okay? You need as much of that as possible. And you should, if you do it right, you should have so many problems fixed that by the time you start creeping into strength specific territory, the strength gain should already be obvious. So that's how I look at that. Take the off-season stuff seriously. If all you do is just dick around because you're just biding time for the next 6 or 8 weeks until you can go heavy again, you're going to be real disappointed in all that wasted time. Go in, attack it, learn to make those different exercises, those variations, those lighter weight thresholds and higher reps work for you. If you do it right, it'll take your game to the next level. Number 5, over-specialization. I harp on this all the time. Over-specialization means that you are limiting yourself to what you think is the most sport-specific movements. Those absolutely have a role. Again, like they do in every athletic program. You need time if you're a fighter to practice sport-specific drills and setups and movements. You know, you can't just be, polishing decks, wax on, wax off, and expect that to make up your entire game. You need to actually practice how you're going to play. That is only part of it, though. You will not build all of the skills necessary to survive, necessary to do well and excel, if you are constantly living in this era of over specialization. It's super popular right now. It's what a lot of the powerlifter nerds like to do, where they just squat, bench, and deadlift 3 or 4 days a week. I mean, if you do a cross section of the top 100 on open powerlifting and go through each weight class, division, age group, gender, whatever you like, you're going to find that most of the people there do not just squat, bench, and dead 3 days a week. That's rare. Some people do it and it works for them. But even there, they are going to insert things that target weaknesses, keep them well rounded. Most of the successful athletes, successful lifters, have ample time dedicated to variations, have ample time dedicated to smaller movements, bodybuilding, GPP, things that are not just the same basic movements. The main lifts and success of the main lifts require more development than they themselves can give you. It's just a fact. So resist the urge to over specialize, resist the urge to do what you think your favorite Soviet lifter does, because even if that's their split, there's so many things about it that you yourself are not privy to. You're just seeing what gets put up on IG or what got wrote about briefly in that article. Most of the best lifters have a wide array of exercises that they do, and it's all in concert with getting the big lifts down. So those are the 5 reasons you can't get stronger. These are the most common specific program-oriented mistakes lifters make when they get to intermediate stage and later. So take inventory, figure out what your plan is. Again, the basics still apply. You're on the hook for figuring out if your training is consistent, if your stress and recovery is in the right balance, that you're putting in enough effort, and you're not putting in too much effort, and that your goals are consistent and dialed in. That's what I covered in the last video. Once you get all those things checked off, you have to make sure your program's doing what it's supposed to do. Manage your recovery by finding a good cruising altitude, all right? Make sure that you are adjusting things as needed so that you can recover. You have to pay attention to that for as long as you're lifting competitively. You have to put your training into phases. You have to work in the off season. You have to grow, target weaknesses, and you got to make sure you're not just lifting heavy with the most specific movements just because you like it and that's what brings pleasure to your heart. You need to think critically about how you're putting this stuff together, okay? So thanks for watching, guys. Go ahead and leave comments in the comment box. Till next time, this is Bromley. I'll see you.